Thanks for coming in, Jenny. You and Les Stahl did an online survey of key stakeholders ahead of this conference, and you basically asked them what's working and what's not working.
That's right.
What did they tell you?
Well, definitely the strongest message about what's not working is that there is a lack of respect for older people, and that's been termed as ageism. And when I did consultations for another project that was related to the area, you speak to people directly and they say things like, I want my doctor to treat me like I was the young woman that I used to be, instead of like talking to me like I'm an older person, I'm the same person inside. And also speaking to people about their experiences of only being in their early 60s, talking about how even their children are starting to behave differently towards them, saying, one woman was telling me she likes to go prospecting by herself, and her son's now saying, that's too dangerous, you can't go, you're not allowed to go. Or coming in and telling you you've got to declutter and downsize, and so already starting to take over the decisions. So ageism, lack of respect for older people, particularly if they're going into hospital, and then people think, well, you can't cope at home, go into residential care, which is the greatest fear for many older people. Definitely the banking and the financial sector's role. There's particularly our baby boomers, they're the wealthiest generation the nation has ever seen, and there's big question marks over what's going to happen with wealth transfer. We're seeing quite a lot of what's called inheritance impatience. And
who's impatient?
The people who believe that they are, and that's the problem. It's where a younger generation believes that they are entitled to that money. So there is pressure for their parent not to spend the money on themselves. So that could be something like renovating a bathroom or putting ramps into a house, because we don't want an ugly ramp on the outside of the house that could devalue its sale price.
So that sense of entitlement combined with ageism,
yes,
and a different treatment, a permission to treat, in a sense, older people differently with less respect.
Yes.
Are you saying that's the seeds of elder abuse?
That's what the online respondents said, and that's when I also do consultations with seniors directly, and I do speak to hundreds of seniors in community talks and also in research projects. That's what they're saying.
So how does that lead to abuse?
Well, that's actually a really good question, and I think that's one of the reasons why there is also a huge focus on us needing more research. And it's a very difficult topic for us to research because there is such shame and taboo around the topic. So even using the term abuse, to take that into a family is extremely shameful. You add to that the cultural dimensions of filial piety, or, just every culture also has, of course, that sense that the family is the private space. So being able to answer that question, I can tell you what we think it is or what I think it is, but I'm not sure until we actually do some more research.
And in a nutshell, what do you think it is?
I do think it is an overpowering, and I do say overpowering, ageism, because you speak to people who might be empowered all their lives, but then there's this kind of tsunami of treatment and behaviour that is, it doesn't matter what you think or how empowered you think you are, we're taking the decisions away from you. And I think that crosses over, unfortunately, also into the ageism is taken into institutions. So, it might be conversations that professionals are having around the support person to the older person rather than speaking to the older person directly. So, yes, I think that's how it happens.
Now, let's then get a bit more nuance in the discussion. What happens when you try and overlay your understanding of this by thinking about culturally and linguistically diverse communities? You did a piece of work for Seniors' Rights New South Wales and the Ethnic Communities Council. What added insights did you gain from that about Indigenous communities or migrant communities?
Yeah, I was definitely looking at migrant communities, so I can't speak on Indigenous communities. But one of the factors is even looking at the definition or even the concept of abuse or elder abuse gets quite problematic. I'll give you an example, particularly with a recently arrived group. So I'm talking about a very recently arrived group, and they were humanitarian entrants. And in the country that they come from, it is a patriarchal society. There is no social security, and there are very clear obligations within family about how you support your elders. When the new Australians come to Australia, they are confronted with a completely different structure of society. So, for example, we had some, they were told this is a free country, and we had some of our seniors that were going into shops and taking things because they thought they were free. Secondly, the concept of getting money for each adult within a family unit is a brand new one. And then culturally, the older person expects that it's the eldest son who takes care of them and does everything for them, and they never have to pay anything. But you move to Sydney, you're in rental accommodation, you're only on job support, you need everybody's income for that housing and for the food. And so the middle generation person is putting pressure on the older person to contribute money, and the older person went to the elders of their community and said that they were being abused.
Aha. So it didn't look like abuse from your cultural lens, but from theirs it sure did.
Absolutely. And and then you can get other kind of complex issues if women come to the country and then divorce. That also kind of interrupts the traditional kind of caring roles, which are also experienced as abuse. So that's one of the reasons why some people talk about the definition of elder abuse. It's a really, it seems quite simple, but it's quite complex because it's from whose perspective.
And how do you answer that question? Because that's a question to be tackled, isn't it? To come up with a working definition that everyone can agree on. Having listened to you for 5 minutes, I'm wondering about
I know
how difficult that will be.
Well, it's one of the reasons why we don't have a prevalence. We don't know what the prevalence is because it depends on what definition you're using. Do you include institutional abuse? Do you include like aged care workers? Or is that not a relationship of trust? It is, but it's under a commercial arrangement. So in answer to your question, I think we do need to, just for practical purposes, draw some definitional lines so that we can get cracking on that. But there will always be peripheral issues to that definition which are important as well.
In the online survey that you assisted with of the key stakeholders at this event, there were some pretty clear things they agreed on and some pretty clear issues that they didn't agree on. Where is the scope for agreement, do you think?
I think the biggest agreement is actually about acting now. There's always going to be areas of disagreement. And I think that we're very much focusing on the very substantial areas of agreement and saying, okay, well, let's get moving on those. And definitely it does start broad. It does start with the anti-ageism. And I often think it probably is the boomers, who also kind of, that I benefit from. I'm just behind them as a Gen X, who tackled sexism, equal pay for equal work, family violence, all of those things that were private sector that can move into the public sector. I think now they're experiencing this wall of ageism and going, no, that's not going to happen. So
acting now.
Some practical kind of look at laws that might need to change. Definitely around banking and financial arrangements and enduring powers of attorney. Some of that's going to need some really kind of complex kind of think and work. And so they're saying let's start it now. And then from also a practical point of view, it is looking at giving the resources that are required to establishing those referral pathways, because you have to have intersector work. I was speaking to, I'm not going to tell you the communities that they were, because they did want me to actually share these stories, but privacy and respecting their cultural group is really important. So a community was talking about where they have dowry. And so a woman was saying that she had gold jewellery, and her gold jewellery was her dowry, but when her husband died, the eldest son said, no, that's mine now, and took the gold jewellery. And so I was kind of saying, well, under Australian law, it's actually yours. And so this is...
It's the woman's.
It's the principle of multiculturalism. You've had that for, which is Australian law, but I understand your cultural rules are this. So you actually have this choice to kind of go, this is the cultural way of doing it, or I can insist on these rights that I have. And she was saying, well, and many of them were kind of talking about this, they were saying, we would like to insist, but what if they throw us out of our house? Because we don't own this house. What if they stop letting us see the grandkids? So that's why family mediation is becoming so important, because they're saying, no, I don't want this to happen, but I have no way within this context, and there is too much for me to lose. It's intersectoral, because what they need is kind of, you give me my legal options, but then I actually think about the consequences of that. So then I need to say, well, what options do I have around that consequence to mitigate that? And then that's how they make a decision. So just having one call, here's your legal rights, off you go, it's not quite enough. We need to actually have more behind that.
Wonderful. Complex issues. Thank you so much for taking us through.
Thank you.